The Arizona Territory in the 1870s was a place that mistook suffering for strength. It baked the humanity clean out of a man, leaving nerve and bone and thirst. Caro Blanca was no different. It was less a town than a scab on the lip of the desert, a collection of adobe and warped pine squatting under a white-hot sky. Jesse McCrae rode in slow. His horse, a bay mare with more ribs than sense, limped on her left fore. The iron shoe was loose again. Jesse felt the grit between his teeth. He'd been riding for 3 weeks, pushing south from Prescott, chasing a rumor that turned to dust, like all the others. He was a man shaped by emptiness. The lines on his face were etched deep, not by laughter, but by sun and a quiet, constant anger he'd carried for 15 years. His past was a heavy coat he couldn't take off, even in the desert heat. He needed 2 things, horseshoes and a bottle of whiskey. The whiskey first. He tied the mare to a splintered hitching rail outside the only establishment that looked open. The Gilded Cage. A poor name for a saloon, Jesse thought. Cages were cages, no matter how much gold you painted on the bars. He pushed the batwing doors open. The smell hit him first. Stale liquor, unwashed bodies, tobacco smoke, and something sour underneath it all. The place was dim, the air thick with afternoon heat. A few miners nursed warm beers at a corner table. A man with a ruined face played a piano badly, the keys tinny and out of tune. Jesse walked to the bar, his spurs ringing softly on the floorboards. The bartender, a heavy man sweating through his shirt sleeves, didn't look up. He wiped the bar with a rag that only moved the dirt around. "Whiskey," Jesse said. His voice was rust. The bartender slid a dirty glass and a bottle. Jesse poured 2 fingers, pushed a coin across the wet wood, and drank it in one motion. The fire in his throat was a familiar comfort. He was about to ask about a blacksmith when the sound came. It wasn't a loud sound, but it cut through the noise of the piano like a knife. A short, sharp scream, choked off quick. It came from behind a heavy red curtain that partitioned off the back of the saloon. The parlor. Jesse turned his head. Just slightly. The miners kept drinking. The piano player missed a note, then kept going, a little faster. The curtain ripped open. A man stumbled out, dragging a woman by the wrist. He was thick, dressed in a waistcoat that strained against his gut. He was laughing, but his eyes were mean. "You'll learn your manners, Sarai," the man grunted, yanking her hard. She stumbled on the hem of her own dress, catching herself before she fell to her knees. And then she looked up. Her eyes met Jesse's. It lasted only a second, maybe 2. Jesse saw the whole world in that look. He saw terror, but beneath it, something harder. Not defiance, exactly. It was the look of something that had been beaten until it was numb, but refused to break. She was young, maybe 20. Her skin was the color of burnt honey. Her black hair tangled and long. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and a dark, ugly bruise shadowed her jaw. Jesse looked away from her and at the man. The man stopped, sensing the attention. He sized Jesse up. The worn-out duster, the dust-caked hat, the scarred hands resting on the bar. He saw nothing to fear. "Something you need, friend?" the man asked, his voice a low growl. Jesse finished pouring his second drink. He didn't pick up the glass. "You're hurting her." The saloon went quiet. The piano stopped. The miners froze, their glasses halfway to their mouths. The man chuckled, a wet, ugly sound. He pulled the woman closer, putting his hand on the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. This is Henley Griggs, and what I'm doing is my business." He squeezed, and the woman, Sarai, flinched, a sharp intake of breath. "She's my property," Griggs said, his smile widening. "Part of a debt and not up for sale. Now, unless you're buying around for the house, I suggest you finish your drink and move on." Jesse's hand didn't move from the bar. He stared at the bruise on her face. It was new. Griggs yanked her again, pulling her toward the stairs. "Get up to the room. We ain't finished." Sarai didn't look back. The red curtain fell closed. The piano started playing again. Too loud this time. Jesse picked up his glass. His hand was steady. He drank the whiskey. It tasted like ash. He didn't leave. He bought the bottle, paid the blacksmith to fix the shoe, and found a cot in the back of the livery stable for 2 bits. He told the smith he'd be leaving in the morning. It was a lie. He couldn't shake the look in her eyes. It was the same look he'd seen 15 years ago, in a burning settlement back in Texas, the look in his sister's eyes just before the Comanche snatchers had ridden off with her. Lena! She was 10 years old. He was 12, and he'd hidden in the cellar like a coward while they took her. He'd never forgiven himself. He'd spent the last decade and a half wandering, following every rumor of a pale-haired woman with green eyes living with the tribes, or sold south into Mexico. Every trail went cold, but the guilt never did. He wouldn't hide this time. Night fell. Caro Blanca didn't get cooler. The heat just settled in the dust. Jesse sat across the street from the gilded cage, leaning against the adobe wall of the general store, hidden in shadow. He watched the saloon window. He saw her. Sarai. She was working now. She carried trays of drinks, her movements quick and silent. He saw men grab at her as she passed. She twisted away from their hands with a practiced, weary grace. She never smiled. Her face was a mask of careful emptiness. Later, around 10 o'clock, he saw Griggs cuff her on the back of the head for spilling a drink. She just cleaned it up, her back straight, her face turned away. She was both servant and possession. She belonged to the place, like the bad piano or the watered-down liquor. He watched the townsfolk, the blacksmith, the store owner, the miners. They saw it all. They saw her flinch when Griggs walked by. They saw the way she held her arm, guarding her ribs, and they did nothing. They nursed their drinks, looked at their cards, and talked about the price of silver. Jesse heard 2 men walk past his hiding spot, their voices low. "Heard Griggs nearly broke her jaw this afternoon," one whispered. "She's a stubborn one, but he'll break her. He always does. Got her for near nothing. He says, 'It ain't right?' 'It ain't your business.'" The other man grunted. "Griggs owns this town, owns the sheriff. You want to end up in a ditch? Keep your eyes on your own drink." The men moved on, disappearing into the dark. Jesse stared at the window. He saw his sister's face. He saw Sarai. They blurred together. He wasn't a good man. He knew that. He had killed men for less. He had run from fights he should have stood for. But this was different. This was a reckoning. The next morning, he walked back into the saloon. It was empty, save for the bartender sweeping up broken glass and sawdust. The air was stale. "Griggs," Jesse said. The bartender nodded toward the stairs, not stopping his work. "His office." Jesse's boots were heavy on the wooden steps. He knocked. "Enter." Griggs was at a desk, counting stacks of coins. He looked up, annoyed. "You again, the drifter? You lost?" "I'm here about the woman," Jesse said, standing in the doorway. "Sarai." Griggs leaned back in his chair. He laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Are you deaf? I told you, not for sale." "Everything's for sale," Jesse said, stepping into the room. It was small, smelled of stale cigar smoke. "You got coin?" Griggs sneered. "I doubt it. You look like you ain't eaten a square meal in a month. What's your offer? $10. "I have a horse, a good mare, once she's shod proper, and a saddle. Good leather." "A horse," Griggs said, amused. "A horse for a prime piece like that? You're insane. She's worth 50 horses. She's Mexican, part Apache, rare. Men pay good money for rare." "She's a person," Jesse said, his voice flat. "She's cargo," Griggs corrected him. "She was sold to me to cover a gambling debt by a man who stole her from her family 10 years ago. She's mine. By law and by purchase. Now get out of my office." Jesse didn't move. He looked at the man's soft hands. The man had never known a day of real hardship. He just caused it. "I'll give you everything I have," Jesse said. "The mare, the saddle, my rifle." Griggs's eyes lit up at the rifle. It was a good one, a repeater, resting in the crook of Jesse's arm. But then he shook his head, his expression hardening. "No, I like having her here. She's good for business, and she's still learning her lessons." Griggs stood up, buttoning his waistcoat. He was shorter than Jesse, but wider. "I'm telling you for the last time, she is not for sale." Jesse looked at him. He saw the cruelty. He saw the pride. This man wouldn't sell, because his power came from the owning, not the money. Jesse turned and walked out. The failed barter settled something in him. If he couldn't buy her, he'd have to wager for her. And if he couldn't win the wager, he'd have to do something else. He spent the day preparing. He sold his saddle to the blacksmith for $10 and a piece of jerky. He kept the horse and the rifle. He used the money to buy a box of cartridges. He sat in the shade of the livery, cleaning his rifle, loading the magazine, and then ejecting all the rounds but one. He pocketed the single cartridge. He ate the jerky, drank water from the livery trough, and waited for night. When the saloon was full, he walked in. The piano stopped. The chatter died. Jesse McCrae had a different air about him tonight. He wasn't a drifter. He was a ghost. He walked straight to the back table where Griggs was playing poker with 3 other men. "Griggs," Jesse said. Griggs looked up, his face flushing with anger. "I told you." "I want to play," Jesse said. He dropped the $10 on the table. "One hand." Griggs looked at the money, then at Jesse. "This is a $200 game, boy. Your $10 is an insult." "The $10 is the ante," Jesse said. He unslung his rifle from his shoulder and laid it gently on the green felt. "That's my buy-in." The table was silent. A man's rifle was his life. Griggs stared at the repeater. It was worn, but the wood was oiled and the steel was clean. "That's a fine weapon," he mused, "but still not enough." "And the horse," Jesse said, "the mare outside." "I'm not interested in your broken-down nag." Griggs started to shuffle the cards. "Get lost." "One hand," Jesse insisted. "Draw, you and me, for the woman." Griggs stopped shuffling. He laughed. "You'd bet your rifle and horse on one hand of draw poker? For a woman who ain't yours?" "For her freedom," Jesse said. The saloon was holding its breath. Sarai was standing by the bar, holding a tray of empty glasses. Her knuckles were white. Griggs smiled. He loved this. He loved the risk, but he loved the power more. "You don't have enough to bet for her, drifter, but maybe you got enough to bet against me." Griggs leaned forward. "All right, one hand, you and me, your rifle and horse against—" "What? I'm not betting the girl. She's worth too much." "You're a coward," Jesse said, soft and low. Griggs's eyes went dark. "What did you say?" "You're afraid to bet her because you know she's not really yours. You know she's stolen, and it makes you weak." Griggs slammed his hand on the table. "You're dead, boy." He took a breath, composing himself, his face a mask of false calm. "Fine. You want to play for the girl? You don't have the stakes. I'll raise you." Jesse didn't blink. "I'll see your rifle, your horse, and I'll raise you your life." Griggs said, his voice slick. "You lose. Your rifle is mine. Your horse is mine. And my men drag you out back and put a bullet in your head." "And if I win?" Jesse asked. "If you win," Griggs chuckled, "you get your rifle back and you get the girl, but you don't have enough to call my raise. Your life ain't worth hers." Jesse stood still for a long moment. He reached into his shirt pocket. He pulled out the single cartridge he had kept. He placed it on the table, next to the rifle. "This is the last bullet I own," Jesse said. "It's a .44-70, Fits this rifle. This bullet is my life. It's the one you'll use on me if I lose. This is my call." The table stared at the single brass round. It was an insane bet, a bet of pure desperation. Griggs stared at the bullet. He stared at Jesse's cold, empty eyes, and he smiled. He believed he was betting against a desperate fool. He was only half right. "Deal the cards," Griggs said to the bartender. The bartender dealt 5 cards, face down, to each man. Jesse picked up his hand. He looked at it once. A pair of jacks. Nothing else, a useless hand. Griggs looked at his, and his smile tightened. He was confident. "How many?" the bartender asked Griggs. "I'll take 3, Griggs said, sliding 3 cards into the middle. The bartender dealt him 3 new cards. Jesse watched. He hadn't moved. "Drifter?" the bartender asked. "I play these," Jesse said, laying his cards face down. Griggs laughed out loud. "Playing pat? Standing on a pair? You're bluffing, boy, and you're bad at it." Griggs turned his cards over slowly, one by one. A queen, another queen, and a third queen. He showed his hand. 3 of a kind. 3 ladies. Looks like you lose, Drifter. Jesse turned his own hand over. A pair of jacks. Griggs grinned, reaching for the rifle and the bullet. "A pleasure doing—" "I didn't discard," Jesse said. Griggs froze. Jesse slowly turned over his other 3 cards. Jack, 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 4 jacks. The room was dead quiet. The sound of a fly buzzing near the window was deafening. Jesse had won. Griggs stared at the cards. His face went from triumph to confusion to a deep, purple rage. He looked at the bartender. He looked at Jesse. "He cheated," Griggs whispered. Then he shouted it. "He cheated! You worthless piece of trash, you cheated!" "I played the hand I was dealt," Jesse said. He reached for his rifle. "You ain't touching nothing," Griggs roared, and he kicked the table over. Cards and whiskey glasses flew. Griggs lunged for the gun on his hip. He wasn't fast enough. Jesse's violent past was a part of him, a reflex. He didn't grab the rifle. He drew the pistol he'd kept hidden at his belt, the one he hadn't bet. But Griggs was already moving, diving behind the overturned table. A shot exploded, wood splintering near Jesse's head. Jesse fired back, but the saloon was chaos. Men were shouting, diving for cover. Jesse saw Griggs scramble up, using the piano for cover, leveling his pistol. Jesse's own gun clicked, empty. He'd used his last rounds in the desert. Griggs saw it. He smiled, a terrible, bloody smile, as he stepped out from behind the piano, aiming center mass. "Goodbye, Drifter." Jesse dove for the overturned table, his hand closing around the one thing he had left, the single brass cartridge. He snatched the repeater, his fingers working with desperate, practiced speed. He jacked the lever, ejecting the empty chamber. He jammed his thumb into the loading gate, pushing the single bullet home. Griggs fired. The shot tore through the muscle of Jesse's left arm. The pain was a white-hot flash, staggering him. Griggs cocked his hammer for the killing shot. Jesse raised the rifle with one good arm. Hip firing. The sound of the 44-70 in the small room was a cannon blast. The bullet hit Henley Griggs square in the chest. It threw him backward, crashing him into the bar. He slid to the floor, his eyes wide with surprise. He was dead before he stopped moving. A woman screamed. It was Sarai. She was pressed against the wall, her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. The saloon was utterly silent. The smoke from the rifle hung in the air. The townsfolk, the miners, the bartender, the piano player just watched. They watched the blood pool around Griggs. They watched Jesse, clutching his bleeding arm. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence was their answer. Jesse knew that silence wouldn't last. Griggs had friends. The law he owned would be here soon. He looked at Sarai. She was frozen. "We have to go," he said, his voice strained. The pain in his arm was sickening. She didn't move. She was staring at the body. Jesse crossed the room in 3 strides. He grabbed her arm, not gently, but not like Griggs. He pulled her. Now! The fear in her eyes broke. She looked at him, then at the door. She understood. They ran. They burst through the bat-wing doors into the dark street. Jesse stumbled, his arm leaking blood down his side. "The livery!" he gasped. "My horse!" They ran across the dark street. He fumbled with the rope, his good hands shaking. He pulled the mare out. "Get up!" he ordered, throwing her toward the horse. She looked at the bareback mare. She looked at him. "There's no saddle. Just get on." She grabbed the mane and hauled herself up. Jesse followed, his body screaming in protest as he swung his leg over. Sitting behind her, he grabbed a single canteen that was hanging on a post. It was all they had. He kicked the horse. The mare, startled, bolted into the street. Jesse looked back one last time. Lights were coming on. Men were shouting, spilling out of the saloon. He kicked the mare again, turning her south, away from the trail, toward the open, unforgiving desert. They rode into the darkness. Sarai sat rigid in front of him, her thin dress torn and flapping in the night wind. Jesse held the reins with one hand, his other arm pressed tight against his chest, trying to hold the blood in. They had nothing but a half-full canteen, a wounded arm, a torn dress, and a horse that was already tired. Behind them, Caro Blanca faded. Ahead of them, there was only moonlight on the pale, dead sand. The desert swallowed them whole. They rode by the light of a moon that was little more than a silver cut in the black sky. Jesse kept the mare off the main trail, pushing her through dry arroyos and over rocky ridges that made the horse stumble and blow. The landscape was skeletal, a place of cracked earth and stone, sharp shadows and pale dust. The air was cool, but it held no comfort. It was the dead chill of a land that despised the living. Jesse rode behind Sarai, his wounded left arm clamped tight to his chest. The pain was a living thing, a hot coal pressed against his flesh that pulsed with every beat of his heart. Blood, warm and sticky, seeped through his fingers. Sarai was a rigid weight in front of him. She hadn't spoken, hadn't moved beyond the necessity of holding onto the mare's mane. Jesse could feel the tension radiating from her, a stillness so profound it was louder than a scream. He knew what she was thinking. He knew what she was waiting for. She was waiting for the bill. Men like him didn't do things for nothing. She had learned that lesson before she could even write her name. Freedom wasn't given. It was traded. She had been traded from Griggs's cage to this one, a horse's bare back, with a killer's arms around her. This man, Jesse, had bought her. Not with coin, but with a bullet. The price would be demanded soon. She watched everything. She watched the way his good hand held the reins, light but certain. She watched the muscles in his back tense when the horse stumbled. She listened to the shallow rasp of his breathing, a sound of pain held tightly in check. She catalogued his weaknesses, his arm, his exhaustion. He was just a man, like Griggs. And men could be fled, men could be fought. In the distance, coyotes yelped, their voices thin and hungry. They were the only sound in the vast, hostile silence. Hours before dawn, when the moon began to pale and the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky, Jesse saw it, a silhouette against the stars, the broken spine of a wall, the ghost of a bell tower. "Shelter," he rasped, his voice rough. He nudged the mare toward the ruins. It was an old Spanish mission, long since surrendered to the desert. The adobe walls were crumbling, the roof gone, leaving only jagged outlines that looked like broken teeth. He slid off the horse, his knees buckling as he hit the ground. A wave of blackness swam in front of his eyes. He leaned against the mare, breathing hard, until the world stopped spinning. Sarai swung her leg over and dropped to the sand, landing silently. She immediately put 10 feet of space between them, her back against a section of standing wall, her eyes on him. Jesse tied the horse to a dead tree near a patch of dry grass. He took the canteen, shook it, less than a quarter full. He offered it to her. She stared at it, her face a mask in the dim light. "Drink," he said. She didn't move. Jesse sighed, the sound lost in the wind. He set the canteen on the ground, halfway between them. Then he turned his back on her. It was a risk, but he had to. He gathered dry mesquite brush with his good hand, hissing as he bent over. He built a small, careful fire in the corner of what might have been a chapel, shielding it with stones so the light wouldn't carry. The flames caught, small and yellow, pushing back the immense dark. He sat heavily by the fire, his back against the adobe. He looked at his arm. The duster and shirt were soaked, caked with blood and dirt. He pulled the fabric away from the wound. It was a deep, ragged furrow, plowed by Griggs's bullet. It was bleeding sluggishly, the flesh around it already puffing up. He pulled a knife from his boot, heated the blade in the fire until it glowed, and then, without ceremony, cut a long strip of cloth from the bottom of his own shirt. He poured a mouthful of water from the canteen into his hand and splashed it onto the wound. The pain was blinding. It sent a jolt straight up his neck and made his teeth ache. He closed his eyes. His jaw clamped so tight a muscle jumped. Sarai watched him from the shadows. She watched the firelight play over his face, a face that was all hard angles and deep lines. She watched the sweat bead on his forehead. He didn't ask for help. He didn't look at her. He just tended to himself, his movements economical and practiced. He was a man accustomed to being hurt. She sat, her knees drawn to her chest, her arms wrapped around them. The fire was warm. It was the first time she had felt warm in a long time, a warmth that wasn't a man's hands or the suffocating heat of the parlor. The flames danced, and she stared into them. The yellow light pulled her back. She was not Sarai. She was Itzel. She was 10 years old. She was grinding corn with her mother, the smell of dust and masa in the air. Her village was small, hidden in a fold of the hills near the border. It was a good place. She remembered her father teaching her the names of the plants, which ones healed and which ones hurt. Then the riders, not soldiers, just men, American men, with hungry eyes and rifles. They came for water and left with whatever they could carry. That day, they carried her and her cousin and another boy. Her mother screamed. She had been screaming in Sarai's head for 10 years. She was sold to a pair of travelers heading east. They cut her hair, called her Sally. She was sold again in a town in New Mexico, to a woman who ran a laundry. That woman beat her. Then came Henley Griggs. He'd won her in a card game from the laundry woman's husband. He'd looked at her skin, her dark hair and eyes that held a trace of her Apache grandmother. He smiled. "You're a rare one," he'd said. "I'll call you Sarai. Sounds like something special." He took her to Caro Blanca. He tried to break her. He used his fists, his words, his body. He tried to scrub the Itzel from her, to make her into the empty, broken thing he'd named. She had survived. She had learned to be quiet, to be empty, to watch. She had learned that all men wanted something. Griggs wanted a possession. The miners in the saloon wanted a moment's release. This man, Jesse, what did he want? He had killed for her. That was a debt so large she could never repay it. He would own her, just as Griggs had. The method was different. The cage was the same. She would wait, and when he slept, she would run. Jesse wrapped the cloth tightly around his bicep, hissing through his teeth. He tied it off, his fingers clumsy. The bleeding slowed, but the throbbing was a hammer inside his arm. He leaned his head back against the wall. The exhaustion was a tide, pulling him under. He didn't trust her, but he couldn't stay awake. He drifted into the shallow, fevered sleep of the wounded. The dream came. It was always the same. The smell of smoke, the settlement in Texas, burning. He was 12 years old, small for his age, crammed into the dark, suffocating root cellar. His father had shoved him in. "Stay! Protect your sister!" But Lena hadn't made it. She was 10. He heard her scream. He heard the men's voices, not English. He peeked through a crack in the cellar door. He saw the painted faces. The fire. He saw a warrior lift Lena onto his horse. She was fighting, her pale hair a bright spot in the smoke. Her green eyes found the cellar door. She saw him. She screamed his name, "Jesse!" He had stayed hidden. He had trembled in the dark, smelling the dirt and his own fear, while they rode away with her. He woke with a gasp, his good hand flailing, grabbing for a gun that wasn't there. The fire was low. Sarai was sitting in the exact same spot, watching him. Her expression was unreadable. He grunted, pushing himself upright. The world tilted. "Just a dream," he muttered, more to himself than to her. He stared into the embers, his heart hammering. He believed she was still alive. He had to. It was the only thing that kept him moving, the only purpose in his wandering. Finding Lena was his penance. He must have drifted off again. The pain and blood loss were too much. His head slumped to his chest. His breathing deepened. Sarai waited. She waited for 1 hour, then another. The man was still, truly asleep this time. His breathing was heavy, labored. This was her chance. She rose like a shadow. Her bare feet made no sound on the packed dirt. She looked at the horse, but it was too close to him. He would wake. She looked at the canteen. She would need it, but it was near his hand. She couldn't risk it. She slipped past the broken wall and into the desert. She did not look back. She just ran. She ran, not toward the trail, but north, toward the dark mass of the mountains. She ran with the desperate, frantic energy of a cornered animal. Her lungs burned. Her legs, weak from months of confinement, ached. She ran until the mission was a lost shadow behind her. She ran until her breath was a raw sob in her throat. The desert was not forgiving. She had no water. She had no food. The night air was dry, and it stole the moisture from her with every gasp. She stumbled on a loose rock, fell hard, scraping her hands and knees. She got up and ran again. She didn't know how long she ran, maybe an hour, but the strength bled out of her, fast. Her vision started to blur. The stars swam. Her legs felt like wood, and she couldn't command them. She stumbled again, and this time, she didn't get up. She collapsed onto the cold sand, her body shaking from exhaustion and the delayed shock of the night. She curled into a ball, a small, dark shape in the vast, empty land. She had failed. He would find her. Jesse woke to the silence. The fire was almost embers. The horse was shuffling nearby. She was gone. A cold dread, sharp and familiar, pierced his exhaustion. He was on his feet in an instant, his head spinning. Damn it! He looked around. No canteen, no horse. She'd gone on foot. He grabbed the canteen and went to the mare. He didn't have the strength to pull himself up. He used the wall, grunting, his arm sending a fresh wave of sickness through him. He got his leg over the horse. He found her tracks easily in the moonlight. She was running, not thinking. He nudged the mare into a slow walk, following the trail of scuffs and prints in the sand. He found her less than a mile from the mission, curled on the ground. She was not moving. He stopped the horse and slid off, landing hard. He walked over to her. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear and defeat. She flinched as he knelt, expecting a blow. Jesse just looked at her. Her face was smudged with dirt, her dress torn worse than before. She was shaking. He didn't have the energy for anger. He didn't have the words for comfort. He was too tired, too hurt. He bent down, hooked his good arm under her knees and his wounded one around her back. He ignored the fire that shot through his shoulder as he lifted her. She weighed almost nothing. He carried her back to the horse, his teeth gritted. He set her on the mare's back, then climbed up behind her, the effort nearly making him pass out. He rode them back to the mission ruins. He slid off, helped her down. He pointed to the spot by the fire. "Stay!" His voice was flat, empty of emotion. He went to the horse and used the knife to cut a short length of rope from the reins. He tied it from the horse's bit to his own wrist. The horse could still graze, but it couldn't go far without him knowing. He sat down by the fire, his back to the wall. He was shaking now, the fever setting in. He picked up the canteen and offered it to her again. She stared at him. This was the moment, the payment. He had brought her back. Now he would take what he was owed. He shook the canteen. "Take it." She reached out, her hand trembling, and took it from him. She drank. The water was warm, metallic, but it was life. She drank half of what was left and handed it back. Jesse drank the rest and tossed the empty canteen aside. He turned his attention back to his arm. The bandage was soaked through. He untied it, his fingers fumbling. The wound was ugly, the edges purple and swollen. It needed stitching. It needed whiskey. He had neither. He just had this dirty strip of cloth. He poured the last drops from his personal flask, not water, but whiskey he'd had tucked away, onto the wound. The pain was beyond anything he had felt. He couldn't stop the sound that escaped him. A low, strangled groan. His vision went white. He slumped against the wall, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking. He tried to fight it. He tried to lock it down, but he was too weak. The fever, the pain, the memory of his sister's face, the killing of Griggs, the desperation of the last 24 hours, it all broke over him. He put his good hand over his face, but he couldn't stop the tears of pure, agonizing pain and exhaustion. He wept, silently, his body rigid. Sarai watched. She had seen men cry before, drunk miners weeping for lost gold, Griggs crying in a rage when he lost at cards. This was different. This was not for show. This was the sound of something breaking. The man who had faced down Griggs, who had bet his life, who had killed without blinking, was sitting in the dirt, crying into his hand because his arm hurt. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a customer. He wasn't a master. He was just a man, wounded and alone. She moved before she thought about it. She slid across the few feet that separated them. He tensed, hearing her, and tried to hide his face. She stopped. Then, slowly, she reached out her hand. She didn't touch his wound. She didn't touch his face. She laid her fingertips on the back of his good hand, the one clenched on his knee. Her touch was light as a moth's wing. Jesse froze. He stopped breathing. He hadn't been touched with kindness in... He couldn't remember how long. He kept his face hidden, but the shaking eased. She held her hand there for a second. Two, then, just as slowly, she pulled it back. She picked up the strip of cloth. She dipped a corner of it into the last of the whiskey in his flask. Without a word, she began to clean the edges of the wound. Her touch was hesitant, but firm. Jesse sat perfectly still and let her... When the sun rose, it was a brutal orange glare. The heat returned instantly. Jesse's arm was bandaged, cleaner this time. The fever had not broken, but it had settled into a low, dull burn. The tension between them was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer the silence of a predator and prey. It was the silence of two strangers bound by a shared disaster. Jesse stood, his legs unsteady. He looked northwest, toward the hazy purple line of the Santa Cruz Mountains. "We go there," he said. "We cross those mountains. We might find friendlier territory. A ranch, a town that ain't owned by Griggs's kin." Sarai nodded. She stood and walked to the horse. She let him lift her up. They rode out of the mission ruins, two small figures in a vast, indifferent landscape. The sun beat on them. The horse was already tired. They rode for hours. The world was a shimmering white heat. Jesse's eyes, gritty and red, never stopped scanning their back trail. Around noon, he stopped the mare in the scant shade of a granite boulder. He slid to the ground, his face pale and slick with sweat. He swayed, catching himself on the rock. "What is it?" Sarai asked. Her voice was scratchy from disuse. Jesse didn't answer. He was squinting back the way they had come. his hand shielding his eyes. "What do you see?" she asked again. He pointed. She looked. At first, she saw nothing, just the shimmering heat rising from the desert floor. Then she saw it, far in the distance, maybe 5 or 6 miles back, a faint column of dust. It was low to the ground, but it was moving, and it was steady. It wasn't the wind. "Riders," Jesse said, his voice grim. "Maybe 4, 5. They're moving fast." He looked at her, and his eyes were clear of fever for a moment. They were cold with certainty. "Bounty riders," he said. "From Caro Blanca. Griggs had family, or just friends who want the reward for the man who killed him. They're on our trail." The dust from the riders was a death sentence, and Jesse knew it. They were on a horse. Jesse and Sarai were on a horse that was already spent. "We can't outrun them," Sarai said. Her voice was flat, stating a fact, not panicking. "Not on the flat," Jesse agreed, his voice a low rasp. The fever was clinging to him, making the world swim at the edges. "We have to break the trail, get into the rocks." He forced the mare into a painful trot, pushing her northwest toward the canyons. Every step the horse took sent a jolt of fire up his wounded arm. He was leaking. He could feel the slow, steady seep of blood down his side, plastering the cloth bandage to his skin. The land changed. The open, cracked earth gave way to a maze of red rock and shadow. They entered a ravine, the walls rising up on either side, narrows and bends. It was a good place to hide, and a perfect place to be trapped. Jesse knew the riders would have to slow down, but they wouldn't stop. They rode for another 2 hours. The sun was a hammer. The mare was lathered, her breathing a ragged, wet sound. "We have to rest her," Sarai said, her hand on the horse's neck. Jesse nodded, guiding the horse into a sliver of shade cast by a high overhang. He slid off the mare, his legs threatening to fold. He leaned against the rock, the stone hot even in the shade. Sarai dismounted, her movements more certain now, less like a prisoner. She took the empty canteen and went to the horse, stroking its nose. "She needs water." "We all do," Jesse said, sliding down the rock until he was sitting in the dust. "We find water, or we die here." The mare suddenly shied, pulling back, her eyes rolling white. She let out a high, terrified squeal, rearing up. "Whoa!" Jesse grunted, trying to get to his feet. The horse screamed again, a sound of pure agony, and thrashed, striking her forelegs against the rock wall. And then they heard it, the sound of a dry gorge shaking, the sound of death in the desert. A rattlesnake, thick as a man's arm and coiled in the shade, struck again, sinking its fangs deep into the mare's chest. The horse went mad. It lunged, bucking, ripping the reins from Jesse's weak grip. It staggered a few yards out into the sun, fell to its knees, and then collapsed onto its side, its legs kicking in a final, useless spasm. Jesse and Sarai stared. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than the noise. Their only advantage, their only speed, gone. The horse shuddered, and a low, terrible groan came from its throat. Its eyes were wide, staring at the white sky. Jesse looked at the mare. He looked at the empty rifle in his hand. He had no bullet to give her mercy. He walked over to the dying animal, pulling the knife from his boot. Sarai turned her head away, pressing her face into the rock. She heard the wet, heavy sound of the cutting. She heard Jesse's strained breathing. When she looked again, the horse was still. Jesse was wiping his knife on his pants, his face pale and grim. They were on foot. They had no water. They had almost no food. And there were 5 men on horses hunting them. Jesse looked back the way they had come. "They'll find the horse. They'll know we're on foot." He stumbled, the fever and the effort taking him. He leaned against the canyon wall, closing his eyes. He was a burden. He knew it. "We walk," he said, pushing himself off the wall. "We have to find shade and water." They walked. The sun was at its peak. The heat was a physical weight. The rocks reflected it, baking them from all sides. Jessie's boots were heavy, filled with sand. Sarai, in her bare feet, moved with a pained, careful step, her soles cut and blistering on the hot stone. After an hour, Jessie collapsed. He didn't mean to. His legs just turned to water and he sat, hard, in the thin shade of a mesquite bush. "I have to rest," he panted, his head swimming. Sarai stood over him. She looked at his face, gray under the dust and sweat. She looked at his arm, the bandage now a dark, crusted red. He was dying. He had saved her, and now he was dying, and the men who were coming would take them both. She looked at the landscape. This was not her land. Not exactly, but it was like it. The plants were familiar. She remembered her father's hands, showing her a root. She remembered her mother, grinding seeds. She looked at Jessie, the man who had cried from pain, and a new feeling rose in her. It was not pity. It was resolve. She would not be taken again, and she would not let this man die. "Don't move," she said. It was a command. She left him. She walked, scanning the rocks, the dry creek beds. She ignored the pain in her feet. She was Itzel again. She found it, a barrel cactus, squat and green. She went back to Jessie. He was barely conscious. "Your knife," she said. He fumbled for it, his good hand weak. She took it from him. She went back to the cactus and began to hack at it. The work was hard, the spines thick. She cut a wide, wet circle from the top. Inside was the pale, damp pulp. She used the knife to scoop it out, carrying it back to him in her hands. "Eat," she said. He looked at the white mush. He chewed it. It was bitter, but it was water. It was life. She went back, again and again, hacking at the plant, bringing him handfuls of pulp. She ate, too, her throat raw. She found a flat, sharp piece of slate and began to dig at the base of a palo verde tree, her fingers raw. She unearthed a long, brown root. She recognized it. She chewed a piece herself, then put it on his forehead. "For the fever," she whispered. She found agave, the thick, spined leaves pointing to the sky. "Fire," she said. Jessie, his head clearer from the water, managed to strike a spark with his flint and steel. Sarai built a small, smokeless fire of dry twigs in a pit, just as she had been taught. She cut the heart from the agave and buried it in the hot coals to roast. She tended to him. She didn't ask. She just did. She took the dirty bandage from his arm. The wound was festering, the skin an angry, puckered purple. She found a creosote bush, its leaves sticky and smelling of the desert after a rain. She crushed the leaves between two stones and packed the green, strong-smelling paste into the wound. Jessie hissed, the sound sharp as a snake bite, his whole body going rigid. "It will clean it," she said, her voice firm. She bound the arm with a cleaner strip of cloth torn from her own torn dress. For 2 days, they moved like this. They walked in the cooler hours of the morning and evening. They hid and slept during the brutal peak of the sun. Sarai found food. She roasted the agave heart. She found brittlebush and knew the seeds were good to eat. She knew which berries to avoid. Jessie watched her. He saw the transformation. The empty, haunted girl from the saloon was gone. In her place was a woman who moved with a quiet, certain confidence. She knew the earth. She knew how to survive. Her childhood, stolen from her, was now the very thing keeping them alive. He was the passenger. She was the guide. His respect for her was a solid, growing thing, and it shamed him for ever having pitied her. On the 3rd evening, the sky turned against them. The air, which had been still and hot, began to move. The wind picked up, whining through the canyons. The sun was obscured by a rising cloud, not of water but of dirt. The sky turned a sickly yellow, then a deep, angry orange. "A storm," Sarai said, her voice tight, pulling her hair back from her face as the wind whipped it. "A bad one. We need shelter." They scrambled up a rocky incline, the wind tearing at them, stinging their skin with sand. They found it, a shallow overhang, a scoop taken out of the sandstone, barely deep enough for them to crouch side by side. They pressed their backs against the rock as the world disappeared. The wind howled, a physical scream that seemed to come from the inside of their skulls. The air was thick with dust, so dark they could barely see each other. 2 feet apart, they covered their mouths with scraps of cloth. They sat like that for hours, huddled together, 2 small, breathing things in a universe of noise and grit. The storm scoured the canyon, erasing their tracks, but it also trapped them, forcing them into an intimacy they had not chosen. The noise made talking impossible, but as the hours wore on and the worst of the wind began to die down, settling into a steady, high-pitched whine, the silence between them became heavier than the storm. Sarai turned to him. Her face was a mask of dust, her eyes the only clean thing. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the wind. Jesse turned his head, though he didn't look at her. "Why what?" "You, in the saloon? Why did you help me?" Jesse was quiet. He stared out at the swirling brown fog. "You still think I want something," he said. It wasn't a question. "All men want something," she replied, her voice hard. "Griggs wanted a toy. The miners wanted a body. You bet your life. That's a high price. What did you buy? What did you want?" He turned then, and his eyes met hers. The fever was still there, but his gaze was clear, and the pain in it was older than the bullet wound. "I didn't do it for you," he said, his voice raw. She flinched, as if he'd struck her. "Not at first," he corrected himself, looking away. I saw someone else." He took a shaky breath, the dust catching in his throat. "I had a sister. Her name was Lena. She was 10 years old. We were in Texas, a raid. They came in the night, killed my folks, and they took her." Sarai watched him, her expression unreadable. "My PA shoved me in the root cellar." Jesse continued, his voice so low she had to lean in to hear him over the wind. "He told me to hide, to protect her, but she didn't make it to the cellar. I heard her scream. I looked through a crack in the door. I saw them ride off with her. She saw me. She knew I was in there, hiding. And I did nothing. I was 12 years old, and I was a coward. I hid." He wiped a hand over his gritty face. "I've been looking for her for 15 years, following rumors, chasing ghosts. When I walked into that saloon, when Griggs dragged you from behind that curtain, I saw the look in your eyes. It was her. It was the same look. And all the men in that saloon, they just watched. They did nothing. Just like I did." He finally looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "I couldn't stand by. Not again. I couldn't be that man again. So I did what I did. I didn't do it to buy you. Sarai, I did it because I refused to be that man." Sarai stared at him. She had expected lust, or power, or even a twisted kind of kindness. She had not expected this raw, jagged piece of his own soul. He had not saved her to be a hero. He had saved her as an act of penance, to try and save the 12-year-old boy still hiding in the dark. She said nothing. She just turned her face back to the storm. But the space between them, the few inches of cold rock, felt different. It was no longer a divide. The storm passed in the night. They woke to a world scrubbed clean, the air sharp and cold, the sky a bruised purple. They were both caked in a fine layer of silt. "We need water," Jesse said. His voice was thick. The confession had taken the last of his strength. They walked. Sarai, guided by instinct, led them down the canyon, and then they heard it, a small sound, trickling. They rounded a bend and saw it, a thin ribbon of water, fed by the storm, running over the rocks. It was a river. It was life. Jesse fell to his knees beside it, plunging his face into the cold, shallow water, drinking deep. Sarai knelt beside him, cupping the water in her hands, washing the grit from her face. When he was done drinking, Jesse sat back, his body sagging. He looked at his arm. The poultice was a caked, dry mess. He fumbled with the knot. "Let me," Sarai said. She unwrapped the bandage. The wound was better. The creosote had worked. The swelling was down. The flesh a raw, clean pink instead of an angry purple. She dipped the cloth in the stream and began to clean the wound, her touch gentle but firm. Jesse watched her, her black hair matted with dirt, the line of her jaw set in concentration. She finished with his arm and looked at his face. "You're still bleeding," she said. He had a cut on his cheek from the ambush, or maybe the storm. She reached up with the wet cloth. He flinched, turning his head away. It was too much, too close. The care. He was a creature of violence and solitude. This tenderness was a language he no longer spoke. He was ashamed of his weakness, his filth, the scars that littered his torso under the torn shirt. Sarai stopped. Her hand hovered in the air between them. She saw him turn away. She saw the shame, and she understood. He was giving her the respect he thought she deserved, the privacy he assumed she wanted. He was treating her like a lady, like someone fragile. She was not fragile. "Look at me," she said. His head turned back, surprised. "It's all right," she said, her voice soft. "You can look." It was the first time in her life she had offered this. She was not a possession to be stared at, not a body to be claimed. She was a woman, offering a moment of her own free will. She was giving him permission to see her, the real her. She took the cloth and gently washed the cut on his cheek. His eyes never left hers. He saw the bruise Griggs had left, fading now, yellow and purple. He saw the old, thin scar on her lip. He saw the strength. He reached up his good hand, his fingers trembling, and brushed the matted hair from her face. His thumb grazed her cheekbone. It was a question. She leaned into his touch, just slightly. It was the answer. He leaned in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. He kissed her. It was not the kiss of a master or a savior. It was the kiss of a drowning man. It was slow, tentative, a map of discovery. It tasted of dust and water and shared survival. It was hesitant. Then it deepened. The hunger that had been sitting beneath their fear for days, hunger for food, for safety, for life, twisted into a new kind of hunger. It became raw, desperate. His good arm went around her, pulling her close, his hand tangled in her hair. She kissed him back, her hands on his shoulders, clinging to him. It was a kiss of grief and release. Then she put her hands flat on his chest and pushed, gently but firmly. She broke the kiss, her breath coming fast. She was shaking. "Sarai," he breathed, his voice thick. "No," she whispered. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the canyon walls, at the open, exposed sky. "Not here." He was confused. "I didn't mean—" "I know," she said, finally meeting his eyes. Her own were full of a fire he hadn't seen before, a mix of desire and sharp, clear-eyed reality. "I want to, but not here, not when we're still hunted, not when we could be dead before noon. I won't be that girl again, hiding in a corner. When I do this, it will be because I am free, not just because I am scared." Jesse looked at her, and the desire cooled into a profound, burning respect. She had, in that one moment, reclaimed every part of herself they had tried to steal. She was not running. She was choosing. He nodded, his throat tight. He sat back, giving her space. "All right." They sat by the river, the water running between them. They were quiet, but it was a new silence. It was a promise. They rested, refilled the canteen, and started walking again, following the water. The moment by the river had given them strength. They walked side by side, no longer captor and captive, no longer rescuer and victim. They were Jesse and Sarai. They walked into a narrow part of the ravine, the walls close and high. They were careless, softened by the emotional release, focused on each other and the path ahead. The first shot kicked up dust at Jesse's feet. "Get down!" he roared, shoving Sarai toward a tumble of boulders. A second shot, from above. A bullet whined off the rock where Jesse's head had been. "They cornered us!" Jesse yelled, pressing himself flat. He had his rifle, but it was useless. An empty club. "How many?" Sarai cried, her voice muffled by the stone. "Too many!" A man's voice echoed from the rim of the canyon. "McCrae, the man you killed in Caro Blanca was my cousin! Throw down your weapons and we'll take the girl and let you bleed out!" Jesse saw two of them moving on the ridge, and he heard another, scrambling on the rocks to their left, trying to get a flanking angle. "Stay here," he hissed at Sarai. "What are you doing?" "Creating a distraction." He grabbed a loose rock, the size of his fist, and hurled it down the canyon. It clattered loudly. The man to their left fired at the sound. It gave Jesse his position. The man was behind a low shelf, not 30 yards away. Jesse did the only thing he could. He broke cover, running low and fast, not at the man, but at the canyon wall, using it for cover. "You fool!" the man on the ridge shouted, firing. But the angle was bad. The flanker, hearing Jesse run, stood up from behind his rock to get a clear shot. He was a big man, bearded, with a shotgun. He never saw Jesse tackle him. Jesse hit him with all his weight, his good shoulder driving into the man's gut. They went down, crashing onto the rocks. The shotgun flew from the man's hands. The man was strong. He roared, his fist catching Jesse in the jaw. Jesse's head snapped back. The man rolled on top of him, his huge hands going for Jesse's throat. Jesse, his left arm useless, fought with one hand. He drove his knife up, but the man caught his wrist. They struggled, their faces inches apart. A shot exploded. Deafeningly close. The man on top of Jesse went stiff. His eyes widened. A red hole appeared in his temple. He collapsed, a dead weight, on top of Jesse. Jesse shoved the body off. Gasping, he looked up. Sarai was standing 10 feet away, her arms outstretched, holding the man's still smoking shotgun. She started, her voice a small squeak. "Get back!" Jesse screamed, because the men on the ridge were opening fire. He scrambled for the dead man's belt, a pistol, a cartridge belt. He grabbed them. He rolled behind the rock, jacked a shell into the pistol's chamber, and peered over the top. One of the riders was standing, exposed, trying to get a clear shot at Sarai as she dove for cover. Jesse fired. The pistol bucked in his hand. The man on the ridge grabbed his chest, staggered, and fell forward, disappearing. "That's two!" the remaining man shouted, his voice now laced with panic. "Jed! Marcus!" Silence. The man fired wildly, his bullets chipping the rocks around them. Jesse heard him scrambling, running back toward the horses. Then it was quiet again. The echo of the last shot faded. Jesse leaned against the rock, his chest heaving. His arm was on fire. His jaw ached. They had lost their packs in the scramble. The food Sarai had gathered, the extra cloth. It was all gone. Sarai crawled over to him. She was pale, her hands empty. She had dropped the shotgun. She stared at the man Jesse had tackled, the man with the hole in his head. "He's dead," she whispered. "We're alive," Jesse said. He offered her the canteen, but it was gone, lost with the packs. He looked down at the pistol in his hand. He looked at the dead man's cartridge belt, still full. He looked at Sarai. She was staring at the second man he'd shot, the one on the ridge, a dark shape in the distance. Then her eyes went to the pistol on the ground near the first dead man. She crawled to it. She picked it up. Her hand was shaking so violently she could barely hold it, but she didn't drop it. She held it, her knuckles white, her face a mask of terror and fierce, terrible resolve. She was no longer the girl from the parlor. She was no longer just the woman who knew the plants. She was a woman holding a gun, and she knew she would have to use it. The echo of Sarai's shot was swallowed by the canyon, leaving a silence that felt heavier than the noise. The man Jesse had shot was a dark shape on the ridge. The man Sarai had shot was a crumpled pile of limbs and blood at the base of the rock shelf. Jesse's breath sawed in his chest. His jaw throbbed where the man had struck him. He looked at Sarai. She was still standing, her arms locked, the pistol held out in front of her. She was staring at the man she had killed, her eyes wide, unblinking. "Sarai," Jesse said, his voice a raw whisper. She didn't move. He pushed himself to his feet, his wounded arm screaming. He limped over to her and gently, with his good hand, took the pistol from her grip. Her fingers were locked so tight he had to pry them open one by one. The moment the gun was gone, her legs folded. She didn't fall, but sank to her knees in the dust. "We have to move," Jesse said, scanning the ridge. "There was one more, the one who ran." "He ran," Sarai repeated, her voice hollow. "He left them?" "He went for the horses," Jesse said. "Or he's just a coward. Either way, he'll be back, or he'll go get others. We can't stay here. This ravine is a grave." The thought of moving, of climbing, was a misery. Jesse was dizzy, the fever and the fight stealing the strength from his bones, but they had no choice. "We need their supplies," he said, his voice grim. Sarai looked at him, her eyes still glazed with shock. "Sarai, we need their water, their ammunition." She nodded, a short, jerky motion. She understood. Survival was a grim business. She got to her feet, her legs shaking. They did not speak. They walked over to the first man, the one Sarai had killed. Jesse, his face a mask, knelt with his good hand. Sarai turned her head, but she did not walk away. Jesse took the man's pistol, a cartridge belt heavy with rounds, and a knife. The man on the ridge was harder. It took them half an hour to climb up to him. He was dead. He had a good rifle, a full canteen, and a canvas sack. Inside was a square of dried jerky and 2 bedrolls. It was a bounty. It was life. "We climb," Jesse said. His voice strained as he slung the canteen and the rifle over his good shoulder. "We get as high as we can before dark." Sarai carried the bedrolls and the sack of food. The climb out of the ravine was the hardest thing they had ever done. It was not a trail, just a scramble over loose rock and crumbling sandstone. Jesse's wounded arm was a useless, burning weight. He had to climb one-handed, his good hand gripping crevices, his boots slipping. Twice, he fell. Twice. Sarai, small but strong, helped him up, her face set in a grim mask. She was no longer shaking. The shock had burned away, leaving something hard and cold in its place. She was focused on the next handhold, the next ledge. They reached the top of the ridge as the sun bled out, staining the western sky a deep, bruised purple. The desert fell away below them, a vast, alien landscape of shadows and stone. It was beautiful, and it was deadly. The temperature dropped with the sun, the heat of the day sucked away by the high elevation. The wind was thin and sharp, cutting through their torn, dirty clothes. "There," Jesse panted, nodding toward a dark shape a few hundred yards away, tucked into a fold of the hills. A shack. It was a miner's cabin, or what was left of it. One wall was half burned, the roof sagging, but 3 walls and a stone fireplace were still standing. It was shelter. They stumbled inside, collapsing on the dirt floor. For a long time, they just sat, breathing in the smell of old ash, dust, and pine. Jesse slumped against the wall. The last of his strength was gone. He was shivering, the fever taking hold again. Sarai, moving with a weary, automatic grace, unslung the bedrolls. She found the dead man's flint and steel in the canvas sack. In the fireplace, there were a few splintered pieces of an old chair. She got a fire going. The small, dancing flame, was a miracle. It pushed back the dark and the cold, casting their long, flickering shadows on the ruined walls. Sarai looked at Jesse. He was pale, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. His new bandage was soaked. She moved to him, untying the knot. His new injuries from the fight were bad. The gash on his forehead was caked with blood, and his jaw was swelling, a deep purple. His wounded arm, from where he'd shoved her, was bleeding freely again. She took the new canteen and a strip of cloth she tore from one of the bedrolls. She washed his face, her touch no longer hesitant. She cleaned the gash, her movements practical. "This is going to hurt," she said. He opened his eyes. He just looked at her, his gaze clouded with fever. She took the pistol she had used, the one Jesse had taken from her. She uncapped the powder horn they'd found. She poured a small pile of black powder into her palm, mixed it with water from the canteen to make a dark, gritty paste, and pressed it into his bleeding arm wound. Jesse's entire body went rigid. A low, strangled sound tore from his throat, but he didn't cry out. The powder would cauterize it, stop the bleeding. It was an old Apache trick. It was also agony. She bound the arm tightly, her hands sure. "It's done," she whispered. She gave him a piece of the jerky, which he chewed slowly. She sat back on her heels, watching him. The wind howled outside, a high, lonely sound. The cold found its way through every crack in the shack. The fire was not enough. They laid the bedrolls side by side, as close to the fire as they dared, but they were separate. Jesse lay down, his body shaking. Sarai lay on her own roll, pulling it up to her chin, her back to him. The shack was freezing. The wind was a living thing, trying to get in. After an hour, Jesse couldn't stand the sound of her teeth chattering. "We'll freeze to death like this," he said, his own voice trembling. "Get in my roll." She hesitated. "Sarai, it's for warmth, nothing else." She moved, slipping from her bedroll and sliding in beside him. He pulled the flap over them. It was cramped. His wounded arm was trapped between them. She lay stiff as a board, her back pressed against his chest. His body was a furnace from the fever. Her body was ice. Slowly, the heat transferred. Her shaking began to subside. They lay in the dark, two enemies of the world, listening to the wind. "I used to pray for the cold," Sarai whispered into the darkness. Her voice was so quiet, he almost thought the wind had made the sound. "What?" he murmured, his mind thick with fever. "In Caro Blanca, in the parlor." Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "It was always hot. It smelled like stale beer and sweat, and the perfume Griggs made me wear. I hated that smell. I used to lie on my cot, and I'd pray for winter. I'd pray for it to be so cold it would just end me." Jesse's good arm, the one around her, tightened. He didn't speak. He just listened. "I thought about killing myself," she said, the words coming out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them in for years. "I had a knife, a little one. I kept it under my mattress. Every night, I'd hold it. I'd press the point against my wrist. I'd think I could be free. Right now, I could be clean. I wouldn't have to be Sarai anymore." He could feel a single hot tear land on his arm. "But I never did it," she whispered, her voice thick with a self-loathing that cut Jesse deeper than any bullet. "I was too much of a coward." Jesse was quiet for a long time. He felt her shame, a cold, hard thing in the small, warm space. He moved, shifting his wounded arm, grunting with the pain, until he could turn her. He made her face him. In the dim red glow of the embers, he could see the tracks of her tears on her dirty face. He lifted his good hand and cupped her jaw. His thumb wiped away a tear. "No," he said, his voice rough, but fierce. "Don't you ever call that cowardice. You know what that was? That was you winning." She looked at him, confused. "He wanted you broken," Jesse said, his voice a low, intense rasp. "He wanted you to believe you were nothing but a thing he owned. He wanted you to hate yourself so much that you'd do his job for him. He wanted to kill that girl, Itzel, the one who knew the plants, the one who was free. His thumb stroked her cheek. But she wouldn't die. She stayed. She held on. Every night you held that knife and chose to see the morning. That was you fighting him. That was you refusing to let him win. He never broke you, Sarai. He never even touched you. He leaned his forehead against hers. You're not broken. You're not his. You're still yours. You always were. She let out a sound, a sob that was torn from the deepest part of her. It was a sound of such profound grief, such impossible release, that it made Jesse's own chest ache. She buried her face in his neck, her hands clinging to his shirt. And she wept. She wept for the girl she had been, for the years she had lost, for the men she had seen die. Jesse just held her, his good arm wrapped around her like an anchor, riding out the storm. When the weeping finally eased, she was quiet. She didn't pull away. She just lay there, breathing against his skin. The fever had made him sweat, and the smell of him, dust and salt and leather, and the faint, metallic tang of blood, was the only real thing in the world. It was the smell of survival. She lifted her head. Her eyes, red-rimmed and exhausted, met his. The fire was just embers now, painting the room in shadow. I am not scared, she whispered. It was a discovery. Not of this. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss from the riverside. It was slow. It was unsure. It was a question asked in the dark. He kissed her back, his lips dry, chapped. It was a kiss that held all the sorrow of the last few days, and all the terrible, fragile hope of the next. She was the one who moved. She pulled the bedroll open, inviting him in, not just for warmth, but for all of it. Their bodies met. It was slow and awkward and almost painful. He was wounded, his arm a useless barrier between them. She was hesitant, her body a map of memories she had to unlearn. It was the first time she had been touched by a man in kindness, the first time she had ever been given a choice. It was not just desire, it was grief. It was two broken people, two survivors, trying to find a single whole moment in a world that had tried to tear them apart. It was an act of defiance. It was a claiming. When she cried out, it was not in pain, but in a release so profound it felt like she was being remade, forged new in the dark, in the ruins of a burned-out shack, surrounded by the ghosts of their past and the threat of their future. They found a small, breathing space of life. They woke to a cold, gray light. For a moment, tangled in the bedroll, Sarai felt a strange, impossible peace. Then the cold hit her, and the memory of the day before. Jesse was awake. His fever had broken. The night had sweated it out of him. He looked pale and haggard, but his eyes were clear. "We need food," Sarai said, sitting up, pulling the bedroll around her shoulders. "And we need to find that trail." While Jesse coaxed the fire back to life, Sarai searched the cabin. It was empty, picked clean, but near the fireplace, she felt a loose floorboard. "Jesse!" she said, her voice quickening. He came over. He used his knife to pry the board up. Underneath, wrapped in a piece of rotting oilskin, was a bundle. She unrolled it on the floor. Maps, old, cracked mining maps. The ink faded to brown. They scanned them, one by one. They were claims, sketches of tunnels, notes about ore quality. But the last one was different. It was a map of the entire mountain range. "There," Sarai said, her finger tracing a thin, faint line that snaked away from the main passes. "It's a trail. It's marked Mule Path, north. It follows a dry creek bed. Jesse, it could take us over the mountains, where they'd never think to look." Hope, bright and sharp, flooded Jesse. A way out, not just running, but a path. "We follow it," he said, his voice firm. "We leave now." They gathered their meager supplies: the 2 bedrolls, the canteens, the rifle, the 2 pistols, and the ammunition. Jesse tucked the map into his shirt. They were ready. They stood at the doorway, the cold morning air hitting their faces. "I'll go first," Jesse said, his pistol in his good hand. "Scan the ridge." He stepped out of the shack, squinting against the gray light. A voice, cold and sharp, echoed from the rocks above them. "Shouldn't have left one of us alive. McCrae." Jesse's blood ran cold. The man who had run— "Get back!" he roared, shoving Sarai back into the darkness of the shack. A rifle shot exploded. The bullet slammed into the wooden doorframe, inches from Jesse's head, sending splinters stinging into his cheek. Jesse fell back, trapped behind the frame, pinned. The man was on a ledge, high up, a perfect sniper's nest. "Come on out, killer," the man shouted, his voice ringing with smug triumph. "I got all day. Or maybe I'll just light this tinderbox and burn you both alive. I saw the smoke last night, knew I had you." Jesse peered around the edge. Another shot kicked up dirt at his feet. He was trapped. He was wounded. "He's got us," Jesse hissed, his back to the wall, his pistol useless against the rifleman's range. Sarai was pressed against the back wall, her heart hammering. She was holding the other pistol, the one she had taken from the dead man. She was shaking again, the terror of the day before returning. She saw Jesse, pale, his wound bleeding again from the sudden movement. He was trapped. He was going to die. The man on the ledge was reloading. He was laughing. Sarai moved. She didn't run to the door. She ran to the side of the shack, to the half-burned wall. There was a gap, a space where a window had been. It was a narrow slit, but it looked right at the ledge. The man wasn't looking at her. He was focused on the doorway, waiting for Jesse. Sarai raised the pistol. She held it with both hands, just as she had done in the ravine. Her arms shook. The man on the ledge was a small, dark shape. Too far. She was shaking. "Last chance! McCrae!" the man yelled, leveling his rifle at the doorway. Sarai took a breath. She remembered Jesse's words. "You're still yours." She stopped shaking. She aimed. She pulled the trigger. The shot was deafening. The man on the ledge grunted, a sound of pure surprise. He looked down at his chest, as if confused. He looked at the side of the shack, his eyes wide. He fired his rifle, but the shot went wild, straight into the sky. He swayed for a moment, and then toppled, a boneless, heavy thing, crashing down the rocks. He landed in a heap, not 20 feet from the cabin door. Silence. Jesse stumbled out, his pistol raised, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked at the body. He looked at Sarai, who was still standing at the burned-out window, the pistol held in front of her. The gun dropped from her fingers. She slid down the wall, her legs giving out, and buried her face in her hands. She wept. It was not the quiet, grieving sob of the night before. It was a raw, ragged wail. She was shaking from her shoulders to her feet, great, convulsive shudders. Jesse walked over to the body. He nudged it with his boot. The man was dead. He went back into the shack. He stood in front of Sarai, saying nothing. He just waited. When her sobs finally quieted, fading into hoarse, gulping breaths, he knelt in front of Nu. I killed him," she gasped, her hands still covering her face. "You saved me," Jesse said, his voice quiet. "You saved us?" She looked up at him, her face a ruin of tears and dirt. The terror was still in her eyes, but beneath it was the same fierce, hard light he had seen in the ravine. She was shaken, but she was not broken. Get rid of him," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Bury him. I don't want to look at him." Jesse nodded. He found a rusted shovel head in the corner and a broken piece of timber for a handle. He went outside. The ground was high country rock, hard and unforgiving. It took him over an hour to dig a shallow grave. His arm throbbed. and his heart felt as heavy as the stones he moved. Each scrape of the shovel felt like a prayer for a world that made this necessary. He rolled the body in, covered it, and piled stones on top. When he returned, Sarai was at the fireplace, washing her face with the last of the water from the dead man's canteen. She had reloaded her pistol. She had packed the bedrolls. Jesse stood at the door, looking at the fresh pile of stones. "His belt buckle," he said, his voice heavy. "It had a T on it, same as the man in the ravine. They weren't just Grig's cousins." Sarai turned, her face clean but pale. "What does it mean?" "It means they were professionals." Jesse said, "Maybe ex-Rangers, maybe just a hired posse. It means this isn't just revenge. It's a bounty. We're worth money, dead or alive." The hope they had felt from the map vanished, replaced by a cold, hard reality. "There will be more," Sarai said. It was not a question. "Yes," Jesse said. "They'll find the horses. They'll find the graves. And they will follow." He shouldered his bedroll. Sarai picked up hers. She checked her pistol one last time and tucked it firmly into the waistband of her dress. There was no safety. Not yet. There was only the map in Jesse's pocket, the trail north, and the long, cold road ahead. They walked out of the shack, leaving the third grave behind them, and did not look back. The mule path from the map was a phantom, a trail that existed more in memory than in reality. It led them out of the high desert and into the teeth of the mountains. The air grew thin, the wind sharp. The red rock and sparse mesquite gave way to sheer granite faces and skeletal pines. They were climbing into the sky, and the sky was an enemy. The world turned white in an afternoon. It did not snow. It was a blizzard, a sudden, howling assault of wind and ice that appeared from a clear gray sky. The temperature plummeted. The wind screamed through the pass, a physical force that tried to peel them from the rock. Jesse, who had been moving with a grim, forward momentum, began to fail. The cold settled into his wound. It was no longer a dull throb. It was a core of living fire. The black powder and creosote had sealed the skin, but the infection was trapped beneath, festering, poisoning him from the inside. He stumbled, catching himself on the rock wall, his good hand shaking. "Jesse," Sarai said, her voice snatched by the wind. "I'm all right," he lied, pushing himself upright. He took 2 more steps and fell to his knees. He was not all right. He was burning up in the middle of a snowstorm. His breath was a ragged, wet sound, his skin pale and slick with a feverish sweat that froze instantly in the wind. Sarai grabbed his arm to haul him up. He cried out, a sound of such sharp agony that it cut through the wind. She touched his wounded arm, even through the thick bandage, and felt the unnatural, pulsing heat. "We have to stop," she yelled, her words torn away. "We stop, we die," Jesse panted, trying to get his feet under him. "The storm, it'll bury us." "We keep going. You'll die," she shot back, her face raw from the ice. She looked around, her eyes squinting against the blinding white. There was nothing, just rock and snow and the terrifying, empty sky. They were going to die here, 2 small, frozen shapes on a forgotten path. Then she saw it, through a momentary lull in the swirling snow. She saw a wisp of gray smoke, low against the white. It was thin, easily mistaken for the storm, but it was rising. "There," she said, pointing. "Smoke. A cabin." It gave Jesse the last of his strength. He leaned on her, a dead weight, and they staggered through the deepening drifts. It was less than half a mile, but it felt like 100. They weren't walking. They were a single, 4-legged creature, stumbling, falling, and rising again. The cabin was tucked into a cleft of rock, its roof heavy with snow. It was made of rough-hewn logs, dark with creosote. A stack of pelts was piled against the leeward wall. Sarai pounded on the door, her fist numb.
Please help us.
They waited. The wind howled.
Please.
She screamed, desperation cracking her voice.
He's dying.
The door scraped open a few inches. A man's eye peered out, suspicious, weathered. Then a rifle barrel. "We got no business with you," a voice like grinding rocks said. "Move on." "We can't," Sarai pleaded, holding Jesse up.
He's wounded. He'll freeze.
"Not my concern," the voice said. "Trouble follows folk like you. I seen your kind." The man looked at Jesse, seeing the pistols, the fever. He looked at Sarai, at her dark skin, her torn dress. He saw a killer and his stolen woman. The door started to close. Sarai was desperate. She looked at the man's face in the crack. His skin was leather, his hair long and gray, tied back with a strip of rawhide. He wore a necklace of bear claws. He was not white, not entirely. She didn't think, she just spoke. The words felt strange, torn from a part of her she had kept buried. She spoke in the language of her grandmother. She spoke in Endi.
You are of the people,
she said, her voice rough. We are not the trouble you seek. We are the hunted. This man is dying. By the spirits of this mountain, I ask for shelter. The rifle barrel did not move. The eye in the crack widened. The man was silent. He looked at her, really looked at her, his gaze piercing. He was seeing Itzel. Slowly, the door scraped open. The man was old, wiry, and tough as cured leather. He said nothing, but stepped aside, his rifle still in his hand. He jerked his head, a silent command to enter. The cabin was one room, dark and thick with the smell of wood smoke, curing hides, dried herbs, and old sweat. It was intensely warm. Sarai dragged Jesse inside. The moment the heat hit him, Jesse's legs gave out completely. He collapsed onto the dirt floor, unconscious. The old trapper, Silas, looked at the heap of them by his door. He looked at Jesse's face, pale as death. He looked at Sarai. "He's Apache," he said, his voice just as rough, but in English now. He pointed at Jesse. "This one, he is not." "He saved my life," Sarai said, kneeling beside Jesse, trying to rouse him. Silas grunted. He kicked the door shut, plunging the room into the dim, orange light of the fire. "Bring him." He pointed to a raised cot of pine boughs and furs in the corner. Together, they lifted Jesse onto it. "He will die," Silas said, not as a curse, but as a fact. "The poison is in his blood. The mountain cold has sealed it in."
You have to help me,
Sarai said, her voice fierce.
You know the ways.
Silas looked at her, his expression unreadable. "The ways are for the people, not for him."
He is my people,
Sarai said, her voice low and dangerous. The old man stared at her. He saw the fire in her, the same fire in her eyes that he had seen in the eyes of warriors long dead. He gave a short, sharp nod. "Cut the bandage," he commanded.
For 3 days, the blizzard raged. For 3 days.
Jesse burned. The infection was worse than they thought. When Sarai cut the bandage, the wound was swollen, the skin a tight, dark purple, leaking a thin, foul smend. Silas was grim. He did not have whiskey. He had his own medicine. He made a poultice of boiled willow bark and something dark and pungent that Sarai didn't recognize. He packed it into the wound, and Jesse's body arched off the cot, a scream trapped in his throat. "Hold him," Silas ordered. Sarai held him. She held his good arm, his shoulders, as he thrashed. The fever took him. He was not in the cabin. He was somewhere else, somewhere terrible. He was in the dark, in the root cellar.
"Lena,"
he breathed, his voice a dry rasp. "Lena, hide! Get to the cellar!" Sarai wiped his face with a cool, damp cloth. The heat from his skin was terrifying. "Lena, I'm sorry," he moaned, his eyes wide, unseeing. "I'm sorry. I should have come for you. Don't..." Don't look at me like that. Silas watched, his face impassive. He forced a bitter, dark tea between Jesse's clenched teeth. The fever will break him, or it will take him, he said. The spirits are fighting for his soul. Sarai did not leave the cot. She did not sleep. She sat by him, wiping his face, holding his hand, listening to the wind and the ghosts that haunted him.
It's all right, Jesse,
she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her.
I'm here. It's all right.
He thrashed, his good arm flailing, catching her. No, not her! Leave her alone! Griggs, you can't! She's not… His mind was a storm, mixing the past and the present. He was in Caro Blanca. He was in Texas.
It's me, Jesse,
Sarai said, her voice firm, trying to anchor him.
It's Sarai.
Sarai, he whispered. Then his eyes focused, not on her, but through her.
Lena, you look like Sarai.
His breathing hitched. He was sinking, his energy failing. His voice was fading. Silas put a hand on her shoulder. Talk to him, the old man said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Do not let him go into the dark. Call him back.
How?
She pleaded, tears stinging her eyes. Tell him who you are. The man he sees is a ghost. You are alive. Give him your life. Sarai looked at Jesse's face, already seeming to take on the pale, waxy look of death. She took his hand, the good one, and held it between both of hers. She leaned close, her mouth near his ear, so her voice could cut through the fever.
My name is not Sarai,
she whispered, the words a secret, a prayer. My name is Itzel. I was born in a village you have never seen, near the river. My mother's name was Isabel. My father's name was Mateo. She talked. She told him stories from her past, the real past. She told him about learning to grind corn, the smell of the dust and the sweet, milky kernels. She told him about her father teaching her to track a lizard, to find water in a dry land. She described the color of the sunrise on the day she was taken, the bright, terrible orange. She told him about the first time she saw a horse, the first time she tasted sugar. She poured her stolen childhood into him. She gave him her memories, her life, her true name, fighting the ghosts that were trying to claim him. She talked for hours. She talked until her throat was raw, her voice a hoarse whisper. She talked while Silas changed the poultice, while the blizzard screamed, while Jesse's breath grew shallower and shallower. And in the dark, Jesse's mind clung to her voice. He was in the cellar. It was dark, and he was 12. He could hear Lena screaming. But this time, the screaming was different. It was Sarai's voice. No, it was Itzel's. The cellar door opened. Light flooded in, but it wasn't the burning Texas settlement. It was the parlor in Caro Blanca. Griggs was there, laughing, and there was a woman scrubbing the floor.
Lena?
Jesse whispered in the dream. The woman looked up. It wasn't the 10-year-old girl he remembered. It was a woman, in her mid-20s. Her hair was pale, almost white blonde. Her dress was worn, the same color as the dust. She was thin, her face scarred by sun and hardship. But her eyes were green, the same green as his.
Lena,
he breathed. She was in the parlor. She had been there. He had walked past her.
Jesse,
she whispered. Her voice was his own memory. I'm here, he dreamed. I'm here. I'm sorry. He reached for her. His hand met Sarai's. He woke up. The cabin was silent. The wind had died. The only sound was the low crackle of the fire. The light coming through the single hide-covered window was a weak, gray blue. Sarai was asleep, her head resting on the edge of the cot, her hand still holding his. Silas was sitting in his chair, his eyes closed, but not sleeping. Jesse's body ached. His arm felt like it was full of fire and stones, but the fever was gone. The world was sharp, clear and agonizingly real. He looked at Sarai's sleeping face. He saw her exhaustion, the dark circles under her eyes, the lines of stress around her mouth. He saw the woman who had brought him back. "Sarai," he whispered. Her head jerked up. Her eyes flew open, wide with fear, then softened with a profound, bone-deep relief. "Jesse." "The fever," he said, his voice a croak. "It's gone." "It broke," she said, tears welling up. "Just before dawn, it finally broke." Silas stood, stretched, and came over. He looked at Jesse's eyes. "The poison is out. You will live." He grunted. "Now you will be hungry." He went to the fire to stir a pot of something. Jesse looked at Sarai. He held her hand. You were talking." She nodded. "I was telling you stories." "I heard you," he said. "Your name?" "Itzel." She met his gaze, and there were no more secrets between them. "In the fever," Jesse said, his voice suddenly urgent. He tried to sit up, but the pain in his arm made him fall back. "In the dream, it was so real." "What, Jesse?" "I saw her," he said. "I saw Lena." Sarai's breath caught. She wasn't a girl. She was a woman, older, her face. It was hard, but it was her. He gripped Sarai's hand, his knuckles white. "She was there, Sarai. She was in Caro Blanca, in the saloon. I saw her scrubbing the floor. The pale-haired woman with green eyes. She was there." Sarai stared at him. She thought back. The saloon was full of women, servants, girls. She had kept her eyes down. She had avoided them. But a pale-haired woman? A whisper of a memory. A woman in the laundry room. One Griggs never let near the customers. One who never spoke. "My God, Jesse!" she whispered. I think I saw her, once, in the back, washing sheets. I thought she was just another one of his, but she was so quiet." "She's alive," Jessie said, the words a prayer and a verdict. "She's alive, and she's there, in that town." The realization settled over them, heavy as the snow outside. The map in Jessie's shirt, the one that led north to freedom, was now just a piece of paper. Their future had changed. "We have to go back," Jessie said. Sarai did not flinch. She had just escaped that hell. She had killed a man to get away, and now he was asking her to return, to walk back into the cage. She looked at his face. She saw the 15 years of guilt. She saw the desperate hope. She remembered him telling her, "You're still yours." He had fought for her freedom. Now he had to fight for his. "All right," she said, her voice quiet, but steady as the mountain. "We go back south. We'll find your sister. Together." For another week, they stayed in the cabin. The blizzard had sealed the pass. Jesse recovered slowly, his strength returning in small, painful doses. Sarai helped him, her bond with him deepening into something solid and unspoken. They were no longer two people running. They were one. The quiet intimacy of the cabin, the shared fear, the shared purpose, it forged them. They talked of their pasts, no longer as confessions, but as shared histories. They no longer spoke of leaving each other. It was an assumed fact. Where he went, she went. Silas watched them. The old trapper, who had seen so much of the world's cruelty, saw this. He respected it. When the snow began to melt and the path was clear, Jesse was on his feet. He was weak, his arm in a sling, but his eyes were alive with a fire Sarai had never seen. They prepared to leave. Silas packed supplies for them, jerked venison, a bag of parched corn, and 2 full canteens. He gave Jesse a heavy coat made of wolf fur. He even gave them 2 of his mules. "You are fools," Silas said, standing at the door of his cabin, the bright, cold sun shining on the snow. "You go north, you live. You go south, you die." "We have to," Jesse said. "The men you killed, They were just the teeth of the snake. Silas warned. The man you shot, Henley Griggs. His kin are law in that part of the territory. I hear things. Even up here. His brother, Judd Griggs, is the marshal in Caro Blanca now. He's a hard man. He's put a price on your head so high. Every killer from here to Sonora is looking for you. They will want revenge. They will not stop. We know, Sarai said, mounting one of the mules. Jesse mounted the other. He looked at the old man who had saved his life. I have nothing to pay you with. You paid, Silas said, looking at Sarai. She paid. She reminded me of who I am. He turned to Sarai and spoke in Ende. Live, daughter of the river. Do not let them break you. I won't, she replied in the same tongue. They turned the mules. They did not go north. They turned south. The journey back down the mountain was harder than the climb. They were riding toward the danger. They passed the burned-out shack, now covered in snow. They passed the ravine, the graves marked by stones. They passed the place where their horse had died. But they were not the same two people who had fled. The fear was still there, a cold knot in their stomachs. But their love, the thing that had been born in violence and terror, the thing that had been forged in the fever and the blizzard, was a tangible, living thing. It was a shield. It was a weapon. They rode back toward Caro Blanca, into the heart of the desert, their love feeling stronger, for the first time, than their fear. Riding back into Caro Blanca was like putting your hand into a fire you knew was burning. The town felt meaner, the silence heavier. The gilded cage still had its doors open, but the music was gone. The place was a wound, and it was festering. They'd hidden the mules in the same rocky pass where they had first seen the bounty riders, walking the last 3 miles into town under the cover of a moonless night. They both knew the name. Silas had given it to them. Marshal Judd Griggs, Henley's brother. The law. It was a different kind of danger. Henley had been a brute, hot and loud. This was cold. The town was his, not by cheap trades, but by the power of the star on his chest. He'll be watching the saloon, Jesse whispered, his voice low as they crouched in the alleyway between the general store and the smithy. His arm was still in a sling, the wolf pelt coat hiding it, but he was weak. He'll be waiting for me. Then you don't go to the saloon, Sarai said. Her voice was steady. The journey back had hardened her, turned the fear into a sharp, clear purpose. She was Itzel now, in her mind. I will. Jesse grabbed her good arm. No, you're the one they'll recognize first. It's too dangerous. They will recognize a victim, Sarai said, her eyes meeting his in the dark. They will see the girl who ran. They won't see the woman who came back. You look like a ghost. They'll shoot you on sight. They'll just stare at me. She touched the pistol tucked in her waistband, hidden by her own coat, a man's coat she'd taken from the grave at the shack. I can handle them. What about Lena? My dream put her in that saloon, Jesse said. But I've been chasing ghosts for 15 years. I'll check the marshal's office, the old sheriff's office. They keep posters. Missing persons, runaways. If she was here, if anyone reported her, her name might be there. And if Judd is there? The law doesn't spend its nights in the office. He'll be in the saloon, drinking his brother's profits. It's the safer bet. Jesse said he hated it. He hated splitting up. He hated sending her back into that place. She saw the fight in his eyes. She put her hand on his cheek, a gesture that was already a deep, familiar comfort. We find her, together. This is the only way. He nodded, his jaw tight. Don't be seen. Find the lead. We meet back at the livery in 1 hour. If I'm not there, take the mule and ride north. Ride for Silas. I'm not leaving you, she said, her voice flat. 1 hour, he insisted. She slipped from the alley, a shadow moving toward the light of the saloon. Jesse waited until she was gone, then moved in the opposite direction. favoring his wounded side, his good hand resting on the butt of the pistol Silas had given him. The marshal's office was dark, just as he'd hoped. A single lock, old and cheap. Jesse's knife made short work of it. He slipped inside, the smell of stale tobacco and old paper filling his lungs. He lit a match, the small flame trembling in his hand. He was in a small, cramped room. A desk, a holding cell, and a wall. The wall was covered in paper. He lit another match, holding it close. Missing, runaway apprentice. Wanted, cattle rustler. Missing girl, 10 years old, taken from Tucson. His heart seized, but the name was wrong. Maria Sanchez. He read poster after poster. The matches burned his fingers. He saw the faces of 100 lost souls. Runaway wives, lost children, men who had walked into the desert and never come back. He saw 15 years of his own failure, papered on a wall. But he did not see Lena McCrae. He blew out the last match. The darkness absolute. The dream had been a lie, a fever trick. He felt the hope drain out of him, leaving him cold and empty. Sarai pushed through the bat-wing doors of the gilded cage. The saloon went silent. It was the same room, the same bar, stained and wet, the same bad piano, though no one was playing it, but the air was different. The fear was thick, oily. A man sat at Henley's old table in the back. He was not large like his brother. He was thin, dressed in a clean black suit, his star pinned to his vest. He had a neat, dark beard and eyes as flat and cold as a snake's. This was Judd Griggs. He looked up when she entered. He did not smile. He did not move. He just watched her. The bartender dropped a glass. It shattered. Sarai's heart was a drum against her ribs. But she did not look at Judd. She kept her eyes down, humble, just as she had before. She walked, not to the bar, but toward the back, toward the red curtain that led to the parlor and the kitchens. She was just a girl, coming back to her old cage. "Stop!" Judd's voice cut the air. It was not loud, but it stopped her cold. She turned, her hands kept deliberately at her sides, away from the hidden pistol. "Marshal," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough. Judd swirled the whiskey in his glass. "I heard you'd run off with the drifter, the one who killed my brother." He took me," Sarai lied, letting the fear show. "I ran from him. I had nowhere else to go. I came back." Judd looked at her, his eyes raking over her, seeing the man's coat, the filth, the exhaustion. He almost smiled. The idea that she would return to this place, to him, was a victory that pleased him more than her capture. "You were Henley's property," he said. "Guess that makes you mine now. Get to work. Place is a sty." He waved a dismissive hand. He had her. She was worthless. The drifter was the prize. Sarai bowed her head. "Yes, Marshal." She pushed through the curtain. The back rooms were the same smell of lye soap, stale bodies, and despair. 2 new girls, younger than she was, huddled by the washtubs, their eyes wide with fear. Sarai ignored them. She walked to the smallest room, a closet under the stairs where they stored linens. She found who she was looking for, a girl named Beth, who was simple, who was overlooked, who saw everything. She was scrubbing the floor, just as Jesse had seen in his dream. Sarai knelt beside her. "Beth," she whispered. The girl flinched. "Beth, it's me, Sarai. I need your help." "They'll hurt me," the girl whispered, not looking up. "They'll hurt us all if we don't. I'm looking for someone, a woman. She was here, pale hair, like straw, green eyes, quiet." Beth froze. She looked up, her eyes wide. "Lena," she breathed. Jesse's heart hammered. "You knew her?" "She was here, for years. Henley kept her back here. Said she was wrong in the head. She never talked, just worked, washed the sheets." "Where is she?" Sarai demanded, her voice urgent.
She's gone, Beth whispered, shaking her head. It was maybe 2 months ago, before you. A man came, an old man, dressed in furs, like a trapper. He bought her.
Bought her? Judd. He was here then, before Henley died. They argued. The trapper gave Judd a bag of gold, said he'd been tracking her for her kin, said he was taking her north, toward Prescott.
Prescott. The lead was real. Jessie's dream hadn't been a lie. It had been a memory, pointing him where she used to be. And the trapper...
Silas, Sarai breathed. Had he known? Had he seen Lena and come back? Or was it another?
He's a monster, Beth whispered, tears welling. The new marshal, he let her go, but he was angry, said Henley was soft, letting her live.
Thank you, Beth, Sarai said. She stood. She had the lead. She had the destination. She had to get to Jessie. She turned to leave the room, and Judd Griggs was standing in the doorway, his pistol in his hand. A touching story, he said, his flat eyes amused. You're not as broken as I thought, and you're a terrible liar. You came back for the other one, didn't you? The pale girl. He grabbed her arm, twisting it. Where's McCrae? Jessie waited. The hour was up. She wasn't back. He felt the sickness in his gut. He'd been a fool. He'd let her walk into the trap. He left the office, moving in the shadows. He had to get to the livery, check for the mules, but as he passed the alley by the saloon, he heard it. A door slammed open. 2 men, deputies, dragged Sarai out, her hands bound. Judd followed, his pistol pressed to her head. We knew you'd come sniffing. Killer. Judd called out into the dark street. I got your woman. Show yourself, or I'll put a bullet in her head right here. Jessie stepped out of the shadows, his good hand raised. Let her go. Drop the gun, Judd ordered. Jessie let the pistol fall to the dust. The deputies were on him in a second. They slammed him against the wall, took his knife. A fist crashed into his jaw, and the world exploded in white-hot pain. Bring him, Judd said. We'll have this party inside. They dragged him into the gilded cage. The saloon was packed. Judd had been waiting, gathering the whole town to watch. He wanted an audience for his justice. This is the man, Judd announced, his voice ringing in the silent room. Who murdered my brother? This is the drifter who came into our town and spilled blood. He shoved Jessie forward. Jessie stumbled, his bad arm screaming. He was weak, outnumbered. You cost me, McCrae, Judd said, his voice low, for Jessie alone. Henley was a fool, but he was blood, and you took his property. He nodded at Sarai, who was being held against the bar by a deputy. She's not property, Jessie spat, blood in his mouth. Judd smiled. No, she's just a witness. He turned to the town. I'm a man of the law. He gets a trial. What's the verdict? No one spoke. The silence was their answer. Guilty, Judd said, his smile widening. Now for the sentence. He didn't draw his gun. He unbuckled his belt, the one holding his pistol, and handed it to a deputy. Hold him up. The deputies grabbed Jessie's arms, holding him upright. Judd hit him, a hard, cold fist to the gut. Jessie doubled over, gasping. Judd hit him again, a blow to his already injured jaw. Jessie's head snapped back. It was not a fight. It was a beating. Judd was methodical. He was breaking him. He hit his wounded arm, and Jessie screamed, a sound that was ripped from his soul. Stop it! Sarai screamed, fighting against the man holding her. Stop! Leave him alone! Judd laughed, wiping his bloody knuckles on his vest. Jessie was on his knees, barely conscious, his face a mask of blood. He's nearly killed, a miner whispered from the corner. That's the point, Judd said. He walked over to Jessie, grabbed his hair, and yanked his head up. He looked into Jessie's swollen, unfocused eyes.
You're tough, I'll give you that, but you're done.
Judd turned to his deputy. My gun. He took the pistol, cocked the hammer, and pressed the cold muzzle against Jesse's forehead. The saloon held its breath.
This is for Henley,
Judd whispered. In that moment, everyone was watching Judd. No one was watching Sarai. The deputy holding her was transfixed by the execution. His grip on her arm was loose. Jesse's rifle, the one taken from the bounty hunter, the one Silas had cleaned, was leaning against the bar, not 5 feet from her. Sarai moved. She ripped her arm free, lunged, and grabbed the rifle. The movement was a blur. Judd heard the sound, the heavy scrape of the rifle stock on the bar. He turned, his eyes wide with surprise. Sarai had the rifle at her shoulder. It was heavy. Her hands were shaking, but her gaze, sighting down the long barrel, was steady. The entire room was frozen. Jesse, slumped on the floor, saw her. He saw the look in her eyes, the same look she'd had in the ravine, the look of a woman who would not be broken.
Sarai,
he gasped, his voice a bloody rasp.
You don't have to do it.
He didn't want this for her. He didn't want this last, final weight on her soul. She looked at him, her eyes full of a terrible, clear love. Then she looked back at Judd Griggs. She saw his face, and she saw Henley's. She saw the parlor, the bruises, the fear. She saw the cage he had built for her, the one his brother now owned. She wasn't killing a man, she was destroying the cage.
I want to,
she whispered. She pulled the trigger. The explosion of the rifle was deafening in the small room. Judd Griggs was thrown backward, as if by an invisible fist. He crashed over his own table, a look of profound, stupid surprise on his face. He was dead. The silence that followed was absolute. The deputies stared. The townsfolk stared. Sarai lowered the rifle, the barrel smoking. She did not look at the body. She dropped the gun and ran to Jesse.
Get up,
she commanded, grabbing his good arm.
Jesse, get up, now!
She hauled him to his feet. He was a dead weight, his legs failing. He leaned on her, and she took his weight. They staggered toward the door. A wounded, bloody pair. The deputies made a move, but a voice from the crowd, the bartender, said, "Let them go." No one moved. The town had seen enough. They were too afraid to intervene, too afraid of the dead man's law, and too afraid of the woman who had just delivered justice. Jesse and Sarai burst out into the night. They stumbled to the hitching rail, where the deputies' horses were tied. Sarai, with Jesse's help, cut 2 of them loose. She shoved Jesse onto one, his body slumping over the horse's neck. She mounted the other. North, Jesse breathed. Prescott. She kicked her horse, and they fled Caro Blanca for the last time. 2 wounded figures disappearing into the dark, leaving the town to bury its own dead. The journey took weeks. They were wounded, slow, and hunted, but no one followed. Their story had become a ghost story, and Caro Blanca wanted to forget. They rode north, following the faint hope that Beth had given them. Jesse healed, his body mended by Sarai's skill and his own stubborn will. Their bond, forged in blood and fever, was now an unbreakable, unspoken thing. They were no longer 2 people. They were one. They found the farm just outside Prescott as the first snows of winter were beginning to fall. It was a small, poor place, a homestead clinging to the side of a hill. They rode up, exhausted, wary. A woman came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. She was thin, her face worn, her pale hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked older than her 25 years. Jesse slid off the horse. He stood in the dirt, his body aching. The woman froze. She stared at him. Her green eyes, so like his own, scanned his face, his scars, his weak arm.
Jesse,
she whispered. The name was a forgotten sound on her tongue. He couldn't speak. He just nodded. Lena, he finally managed. She was alive, she was scarred, but she was whole. She ran from the porch, and they met in the yard, holding each other. Two ghosts finally come home. They stayed for the winter. Lena's husband, the trapper who had bought her freedom, was dead, killed by a fall. She was alone with his two small children. Jesse and Sarai stayed. They worked the land. Jesse, his arm slowly healing, mended the fences and chopped wood. The simple, honest work a balm for his soul. Sarai, Itzel, tended the garden, her knowledge of the earth bringing forth food from the cold ground. They slept in a shared bed in the small spare room, their bodies a familiar comfort in the long, cold nights. They built something real, day by day, chore by chore. Spring came, turning the brown hills a vibrant, hopeful green. Sarai stood on the porch, a warm wind pulling at her hair. She was no longer thin. Her face was full, her hands strong. She wore a simple canvas dress, and it suited her. She watched Jesse in the yard. He was laughing, a sound she had never heard before, full and real. He was playing with Lena's children, a small boy and a girl, lifting them into the air. He was healed. He was free. She smiled, a slow, quiet smile. She rested her hand over her belly, a small, new roundness there, in a land that had done its best to break them. They had found a place to grow. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are listening from, so please feel free to leave a comment and let us know what part of the world you're in. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories just like this one. We would be honored if you would share your thoughts on the story in English.